Chapter 1. The Gloriously Terrible Plan. Greg Olsen stared at the half-eaten sandwich on his tray like it had personally betrayed him. The lunchroom hummed with the low chatter of coworkers, punctuated by the occasional clink of utensils against ceramic plates. He wasn't listening to any of it. At least, not until Barbara's voice cut through the fog of his thoughts. "So, my parents decided to take a cruise," she was saying, her tone light, amused. "They're sending me pictures of the ship like I'm supposed to be jealous. I told them I'd be home binge-watching old movies and eating popcorn. They said that sounded depressing." Greg's head lifted just enough to catch her smile from across the table. Barbara Winton had that easy, relaxed way about her. Like nothing could rattle her unless it involved bad coffee or broken code. 2 years of working together had taught him that much. She laughed often, usually at his dry remarks, and somehow made the sterile glow of their office feel less like a cave. Home alone for Christmas. The word stuck in his mind like a flashing neon sign. He chewed slowly, considering the problem that had been gnawing at him for weeks. His family's annual holiday interrogation. Every December, the Olsen clan gathered at his grandfather's sprawling estate, a house that looked like the Addams family had hired a Better Homes and Garden stylist. It was all garlands and gargoyles, poinsettias perched on antique tables, and enough twinkling lights to signal aircraft. And every year, without fail, the same question. "Why aren't you married yet, Greg?" Last year, his grandmother had leaned across the dinner table and declared, "You're going to be an old cat man." His mother and sister had nodded in solemn agreement, like they were delivering a medical diagnosis. Greg had shrugged and said he liked cats. That answer had gone over about as well as a lead balloon. He was tired of it. The pointed looks, the unsolicited advice, the parade of distant cousins who suddenly became amateur matchmakers. He wanted one Christmas without feeling like a contestant on a reality dating show. Barbara laughed again at something one of the engineers said, and Greg felt the gears in his brain click into motion. It was insane, completely outside his experience. But maybe, just maybe, it could work. A plan began to form, a gloriously terrible plan, the kind that sounded brilliant in theory and catastrophic in practice. He pictured twisted metal, fire, and overdue library books. But desperation had a way of making bad ideas look like lifelines. When the shift ended, Greg lingered by the door, waiting for Barbara to pack up her laptop. His pulse ticked faster than he liked to admit. He wasn't nervous, he was calculating risk like debugging a program with 1,000 unknown variables. Except this wasn't code. This was Barbara. "Hey," he said, catching her as she slung her bag over her shoulder. "Got a minute?" Her curiosity sparked instantly. "Sure. What's up?" Greg led her to a quiet corner near the elevators, away from the hum of departing coworkers. He took a breath, the kind you take before diving into icy water. "So, I have a situation," he began, voice low, measured. "Every year, my family does this big Christmas thing at my grandfather's estate. It's intense. And every year, they grill me about why I'm not married yet. It's like an Olympic sport at this point." Barbara's lips curved, amusement flickering in her eyes. "Sounds festive. That's one word for it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Anyway, I was thinking, since you said you're not doing anything for the holidays, maybe you'd want to come with me, just as a friend. No weird angle, no ulterior motive. I swear." For a heartbeat, she just stared at him. Then her laughter burst out, bright and unrestrained. "Greg, are you asking me to be your what? Fake date? Holiday bodyguard?" "More like a buffer," he said, deadpan. "A human shield against invasive questions." Barbara shook her head, still laughing. "Wow, you must be desperate. You have no idea." She tilted her head, considering him with that calm, analytical gaze she usually reserved for debugging sessions. "So, let me get this straight. I spend Christmas in a mansion with your family, pretending to be—" "What exactly?" "Not pretending," Greg said quickly. "Just being there, as my friend. That's it." Her smile softened, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. A flicker of understanding. Holidays could be lonely. She knew that feeling too well. "You know," she said slowly, "my alternative plan was watching reruns of movies reminding me I'm alone. So, sure. Why not?" Greg blinked. "Really? Really?" She grinned. "It sounds like an adventure. And honestly, I kind of want to see this house now." You made it sound like a cross between a gothic novel and a Christmas catalog. Greg exhaled, relief washing through him like warm light. "You won't regret it." "Oh, I probably will," Barbara teased, slinging her bag higher. "But at least it'll make a good story." As she walked toward the elevator, Greg watched her go, a strange mix of dread and anticipation curling in his chest. His plan was in motion, a gloriously terrible plan that could implode spectacularly. What could possibly go wrong? He thought. The elevator doors slid shut behind Barbara, and Greg had the sinking feeling he was about to find out. Chapter 2. Arrival at the estate. Greg had warned Barbara that his grandfather's house was big. He had even used the word estate, a term that usually conjured images of manicured lawns and tasteful fountains. But nothing could have prepared her for the sight that greeted them as Greg's car crunched up the long, winding driveway. The house loomed like a cheerful Gothic castle, its stone facade softened by garlands of evergreen and ribbons of crimson. Gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof, their grim faces now wearing Santa hats, courtesy of someone with a sense of humor and a ladder. Wreaths hung from towering double doors, and every window glowed with warm, golden light. It was the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a movie, half Addams Family, half holiday postcard. Barbara pressed her nose to the passenger window, wide-eyed. "Greg, you didn't tell me your family lives in a Christmas-themed fortress." Greg parked near the front steps, trying not to wince at the sheer scale of the spectacle. "I did say estate. You undersold it," she said, stepping out into the crisp air. Her boots crunched on the gravel as she turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "Are those gargoyles wearing Santa hats?" "Don't encourage them," Greg muttered, hauling their suitcases from the trunk. "Last year, someone put elf ears on the moose head in the library." Barbara laughed, the sound bright against the winter hush. "I think I'm going to like your family." Greg wasn't so sure. He hefted the bags and climbed the steps, pulling the heavy brass bell chain beside the door. The chime echoed through the house like a cathedral announcing midnight mass. The door flew open, and a whirlwind of holiday cheer swept out in the form of his grandmother. Petite, silver-haired, and dressed in a sweater that looked like it had lost a fight with a glitter factory. She enveloped Greg in a hug before he could speak. "Gregory!" she cried, then spotted Barbara and froze, only for her eyes to light up like a Christmas tree. "And who is this lovely young woman?" Greg opened his mouth, but Grandma Olsen was already bustling forward, seizing Barbara's hands with surprising strength. "Oh, aren't you darling? Look at that smile. Come in. Come in. Don't stand out in the cold." Barbara shot Greg a helpless grin as she was swept inside, her laughter trailing behind her. Greg followed, resigned to his fate. The entry hall was a riot of color, garlands draped over carved banisters, poinsettias clustered on polished tables, and a chandelier dripping with ornaments. The scent of pine and cinnamon hung in the air, mingling with the distant strains of carols. Grandma Olsen chattered nonstop as she led Barbara deeper into the house, tossing comments over her shoulder like confetti. "It's about time Gregory figured out what women look like. We were starting to worry he'd marry his computer." Barbara lost it, her laughter ringing out so loud Greg winced. She adored his grandmother already. Of course she did. The house was packed. Greg counted at least 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and a swarm of cousins before they even reached the main sitting room. Introductions blurred together in a haze of names and hugs. Barbara handled it like a pro, smiling, shaking hands, even cracking jokes that earned chuckles from relatives Greg barely tolerated. He was halfway through explaining that Barbara was a friend, just a friend, when his mother swooped in, eyes sharp as tinsel. "Greg," she said sweetly, "you didn't tell us you were bringing someone. It was last minute," Greg replied, bracing for impact. His mother's smile widened in a way that made him want to hide behind the nearest Christmas tree. "Well, isn't that wonderful?" Barbara, oblivious to the silent panic radiating from Greg, complimented the decorations and asked about the family traditions. His mother practically glowed. By the time they reached the guest wing, Greg was ready to collapse. He opened the door to a room that looked like a Victorian postcard, 4-poster bed, floral wallpaper, and enough pillows to build a fort. Barbara stepped inside and froze. "Greg, there's only one bed." Greg cursed under his breath. He'd forgotten to mention he was bringing someone. With the house bursting at the seams, this was the only option. "I'll take the floor," he said quickly, setting down the suitcases. "No problem." Barbara turned, brows lifting. "Greg, that bed is big enough for a family of raccoons. We'll survive." "I'll still sleep on top of the covers," he insisted, because he was a gentleman and because the alternative made his brain short-circuit. Barbara smiled, soft and amused. "You're sweet. But really, it's fine." Greg nodded, trying not to overthink the logistics. He busied himself with unpacking, ignoring the faint hum of carols drifting through the hall and the laughter of his family downstairs. This was fine. Totally fine. Just a few days. What could possibly go wrong? Chapter 3. The first night, Greg stared at the bed like it was a ticking time bomb. A 4-poster monstrosity draped in floral linens, piled high with pillows that looked like they'd been stolen from a Victorian tea party. It was easily big enough for 2 people to sleep without so much as brushing elbows, but that didn't make the situation any less awkward. Barbara, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. She tossed her overnight bag onto the armchair and kicked off her boots with a sigh of relief. "Okay, this room is gorgeous," she said, turning in a slow circle. "I feel like I should be wearing a hoop skirt." Greg set his suitcase down and cleared his throat. "So, about the bed." Barbara glanced at him, one brow arched. "What about it?" "There's only one," he said, gesturing like the evidence wasn't obvious enough. "I'll take the floor." Barbara laughed, a warm, easy sound that made Greg's stomach do something inconvenient. "Greg, that bed is practically a continent. We'll survive." "I'll still sleep on top of the covers," he insisted, because he was a gentleman and because the alternative made his brain short-circuit. "No accidental, contact. Barbara grinned, amused by his discomfort. You're sweet, but really it's fine. We're adults. Greg nodded, trying to look calm while his internal monologue screamed like a fire alarm. He busied himself with unpacking, lining up his toiletries with military precision. Barbara hummed softly as she hung her sweater in the wardrobe, her movements relaxed, unbothered. Downstairs, laughter and clinking glasses drifted up from the dining room. The Olsen family was in full holiday mode. Carols playing, voices overlapping, the scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey curling through the halls. Greg felt the weight of it pressing in, the expectation, the questions waiting like landmines. For a moment, he was grateful Barbara had agreed to come. Her presence was a buffer, a shield against the annual inquisition. When they finally climbed into bed, Barbara on the left, Greg on the right, the silence stretched like a taut wire. Greg lay stiff as a board, staring at the ornate canopy above. He could feel the warmth of her presence, a subtle shift in the air, and it made him hyper-aware of every inch of space between them. Greg, Barbara said softly, breaking the quiet. You okay? Fine, he replied too quickly. Just thinking. About what? He hesitated. How my grandmother practically adopted you on sight. Barbara chuckled. She's amazing. I think she's my new favorite person. Greg smiled in the dark. She's a force of nature. Silence settled again, but this time it felt lighter. Barbara shifted, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Thanks for inviting me, she murmured. It's nice, being part of something. Greg swallowed, the words catching in his throat. I'm glad you came. Eventually, her breathing evened out, soft and steady. Greg stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of carols and the quiet rhythm beside him. He told himself he'd sleep soon. He told himself this was fine. But when morning came, everything changed. Chapter 4. The unexpected hug. Greg woke to the distinct sensation that something was wrong. It wasn't the sunlight filtering through the lace curtains or the muffled sound of laughter drifting up from the kitchen. It was the weight pressing against his chest, a soft, warm pressure that didn't belong there. His brain clawed its way out of sleep, and when his eyes finally opened, the first thing he saw was Barbara. She was curled against him, head resting on his chest, one arm draped across his torso like he was a very comfortable pillow. Her hair spilled over his shirt in a dark, silky wave, and her breathing was slow, even, peaceful. Greg froze. For a long moment he just stared, his thoughts a scrambled mess of what the hell and don't move. He could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat through the thin cotton of his t-shirt, and it did something strange to his own. Sped it up, then slowed it down, like his body couldn't decide whether to panic or savor the moment. She looked calm, completely at ease. And Greg, against all logic, found himself memorizing the curve of her cheek, the faint crease at the corner of her lips, the way her lashes fanned against her skin. He'd seen Barbara 1,000 times at work, laughing at his dry jokes, rolling her eyes at buggy code, but never like this, never so unguarded. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, hazy with sleep. For a second, she smiled. A soft, instinctive smile that hit Greg like a sucker punch. Morning, she murmured, voice low and warm, before closing her eyes again. Greg's brain short-circuited. He waited 1, 2, 3 heartbeats before her eyes snapped open, sharp with realization. She blinked at him, then at her arm across his chest, and sat up so fast the quilt nearly flew off the bed. Oh my God, she said, mortified. What did I? I'm so sorry. Greg pushed himself up on his elbows, fighting a laugh. You used me as a body pillow. Barbara groaned, burying her face in her hands. I didn't mean to. Oh, this is so embarrassing. It's fine, Greg said, and he meant it. Honestly, best night's sleep I've had in a long time. That earned him a startled glance, her cheeks pink. Seriously? Seriously? He shrugged, trying to look casual while his pulse did gymnastics. I won't tell anyone. Your secret's safe. Barbara exhaled, still flustered but smiling now. Thanks. And, for what it's worth, I think that was the best sleep I've had in forever. Greg's lips twitched. Guess we're even. They agreed, awkwardly with too much eye contact, that it was a simple mistake. No big deal. Just two adults who happened to share a bed and accidentally turned into a cuddle arrangement. Except it happened again the next night. And the night after that. Chapter 5. The murder mystery game begins. By Christmas Eve, Greg had almost convinced himself things were under control. Sure, Barbara had accidentally turned him into a human pillow 3 nights in a row, but they'd laughed it off each time. No awkwardness, no drama. Just two adults navigating a weird situation with humor and grace. Then his grandmother announced the game. Everyone to the dining room, she declared, clapping her hands like a general summoning troops. It's time for the Christmas Eve tradition. Greg groaned inwardly. He'd forgotten about this part. Every year, the Olsen family hosted an elaborate murder mystery dinner, a mashup of clue and theatrical chaos that turned the house into a stage. Costumes, accents, fake blood, the works. It was his grandfather's idea decades ago, and now it was practically law. Barbara's eyes lit up as they entered the dining room. The long mahogany table gleamed under candlelight, set with crystal glasses and silverware that looked older than Greg. Place cards bore names like Lady Scarlet and Inspector Green, and a stack of envelopes waited at the head of the table. "This is amazing," Barbara whispered, grinning like a kid at a carnival. "You didn't tell me your family does live-action theater," Greg muttered. "Because I was hoping you'd never find out." Grandma Olsen handed out envelopes with dramatic flair. "Your roles, my darlings. Read them carefully. Your secrets are inside." Greg opened his inside. Professor Plumridge, eccentric scholar with a gambling problem. Great. He hated accents, and now he had to sound like a Victorian intellectual with a dice addiction. Barbara peeked at hers and burst out laughing. "Countess Ravenwood," she announced in a mock aristocratic tone. "Mysterious widow with a scandalous past. Oh, this is going to be fun." Greg looked up and froze. Barbara had slipped into character like she was born for it. She draped an imaginary shawl over her shoulders, tilted her chin, and gave him a look so smoldering it could melt snow. "Professor Plumridge," she purred, "I do hope you'll keep me entertained this evening." Greg choked on his water. The game began with a flourish. His family scattered through the candlelit rooms, whispering clues and accusing suspects. Barbara was a natural, flirting shamelessly with uncles, trading witty barbs with cousins, and laughing like she'd known these people her whole life. Greg trailed after her, half playing his role, half wondering when his quiet, logical coworker had turned into a femme fatale. At one point, she cornered him in the library, eyes sparkling. "You're terrible at this," she teased, adjusting the feathered headband Grandma had thrust upon her. "You're supposed to look guilty." "I'm guilty of agreeing to this," Greg muttered, scanning his clue card like it might reveal an escape route. Barbara laughed, leaning closer. "Relax, it's fun." And it was against all odds. Greg found himself smiling, even laughing, as they pieced together clues and dodged dramatic accusations. For a few hours, the weight of family expectations lifted, replaced by candlelight, laughter, and the sound of Barbara's voice echoing through the halls. When the first scream rang out, someone had discovered the victim in the conservatory. Barbara grabbed Greg's arm, eyes wide with mock horror. "Professor Plumridge," she whispered, "I think we're in danger." Greg looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something shift. This wasn't just a buffer anymore. This was Barbara. Brilliant, funny, fearless, and he was in trouble. Big trouble. Chapter 6, Sabotage and Secrets. The murder mystery game was supposed to be harmless fun, a little theatrical chaos before Christmas dinner. But somewhere between the library and the conservatory, things went off script. Greg noticed it first when his cousin Todd stormed into the dining room, waving an empty envelope like a battle flag. "Someone stole my clue," he bellowed, his fake detective accent cracking under real outrage. "I had the key to the whole case." Barbara, perched elegantly on the arm of a velvet chair in full Countess Ravenwood mode, raised an eyebrow. "A scandal within a scandal," she purred. "Delicious," Greg groaned. "This is why we can't have nice traditions." Soon chaos spread like spilled wine. Clues vanished. Accusations flew. Aunt Marjorie accused Uncle Phil of cheating, which led to a heated debate about last year's game and whether fake poison counted as a weapon. Greg's grandmother, delighted by the drama, declared it the best game yet, and ordered more mulled wine. Barbara leaned close to Greg, her voice low and conspiratorial. "This is getting messy. Want to help me figure out who's sabotaging the game?" Greg blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," she said, eyes sparkling. "Come on, Professor Plumridge. Let's investigate." And just like that, they were partners in crime, or rather, partners in solving it. They slipped away from the dining room, moving through candlelit halls that smelled of pine and old books. The house felt different now. Quieter, shadows stretching long across the polished floors, the distant hum of laughter muffled by heavy doors. Barbara checked the empty envelope Todd had thrust at them earlier. If someone's hiding clues, they'd need a good spot. Library. Study? Greg nodded, scanning the corridor. Or the conservatory. Lots of plants, easy to stash things. They searched room after room, their footsteps soft on antique rugs. Barbara teased him about his serious detective face, and Greg shot back that she was enjoying this way too much. He could see it in the way her eyes danced, the way her laughter slipped out like music every time they found nothing. Finally, in the conservatory, Barbara froze. "Greg," she whispered, pointing upward. He followed her gaze and saw it. Hanging from the archway, nestled among garlands and twinkling lights, was a sprig of mistletoe. Greg's brain short-circuited. He hadn't noticed it before, hadn't even thought about it, but now it loomed like a neon sign flashing "Kiss her, you coward." Barbara looked at him, her expression unreadable for a beat. Then her lips curved into a slow, mischievous smile. "Well," she murmured, "isn't this festive?" Greg's pulse spiked. He opened his mouth, probably to say something awkward and deeply unromantic, but footsteps thundered down the hall, and Todd burst in, shouting about a new clue. The moment shattered like glass. Barbara laughed softly, brushing past Greg as they followed Todd back to the chaos. But Greg couldn't shake the image. The mistletoe, the candlelight, the way her smile had lingered like a secret. And for the first time, he wondered if his gloriously terrible plan was about to turn into something he hadn't planned for at all. Chapter 7. Midnight Confessions. The murder mystery game ended in a blaze of laughter and accusations. Barbara, in full Countess Ravenwood glory, solved the case with theatrical flair, earning a standing ovation from Greg's grandmother and a dramatic bow from Uncle Phil, who had played the doomed victim. The family lingered over dessert and mulled wine, voices rising in cheerful chaos, but eventually the house began to quiet. Greg slipped away from the dining room, grateful for the hush. He found Barbara in the library, curled in an armchair near the fire, her costume abandoned for a soft sweater and jeans. She looked different now, less like the glamorous countess, more like herself, and somehow that was even better. "Hey," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Hiding from the mob?" Barbara smiled, her face lit by the flicker of flames. "Just taking a breather. Your family is a lot." Greg chuckled, crossing the room to sink into the chair opposite hers. "Tell me about it." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the fire crackling softly between them. Outside, snow whispered against the windows, and the distant hum of carols drifted through the halls. It felt like the world had shrunk to this room. Warmth, shadows, and the quiet rhythm of two people who didn't quite know what to say next. Barbara broke the silence first. "You know," she said softly, "I wasn't sure about coming here. Holidays have been weird for me since college. My parents travel, my friends scatter, and I end up alone with takeout and old movies. It hits harder this time of year." Greg's chest tightened. He'd never thought about what the holidays were like for her. Never imagined the loneliness behind her easy laugh. "I get that," he said quietly. "For me, it's the opposite. Too much family. Too many questions. Every year, it feels like I'm failing some invisible test." Barbara tilted her head, studying him. "You're not failing anything, Greg." He gave a wry smile. "Try telling that to my grandmother." "She adores you," Barbara said, her voice warm. "And for what it's worth, I think you're doing okay." Greg looked at her, then really looked, and felt something shift. The firelight painted her face in soft gold, her eyes bright and steady. She wasn't just his coworker anymore, or the buffer he'd begged for. She was Barbara, funny, kind, and sitting here like she belonged. "Thanks," he said, and the word felt too small for what he meant. Barbara smiled, and for a heartbeat, the air between them hummed with something unspoken. Greg wanted to say more, to tell her how much he'd enjoyed having her here, how her laughter had turned this house into something brighter, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, he said, "You were amazing tonight. Countess Ravenwood stole the show." Barbara laughed softly. "I might have gotten a little carried away. I liked it," Greg admitted, and his voice came out lower than he intended. Her eyes flicked to his, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. The fire popped, breaking the spell. Barbara shifted, pulling her legs beneath her. "We should probably get some sleep," she said lightly, though her voice held a note Greg couldn't quite name. "Yeah," he said, standing slowly. "Big day tomorrow." They walked back to their room in silence, the kind that wasn't empty but full of questions, of possibilities, of something Greg wasn't ready to define yet. And when they lay down that night, the space between them felt smaller than ever. Chapter 8. Chaos at Christmas Dinner. Christmas Day at the Olsen estate was less a holiday and more a full-scale production. By noon, the dining room looked like a magazine spread, crystal glasses catching the glow of chandeliers, garlands draped across the polished table, and enough food to feed a small army. Greg stood at the threshold, bracing himself like a soldier before battle. Barbara appeared at his side, radiant in a deep green sweater that made her eyes look like polished jade. She surveyed the scene with a grin. "This is impressive," Greg muttered. "That's one word for it." The family was already in motion, chairs scraping, voices rising, laughter spilling like champagne. His grandmother waved them over with the enthusiasm of a game show host. "Gregory, Barbara, sit, sit. We saved you the best seats." Greg suspected best meant most visible. Sure enough, their chairs were dead center, flanked by his mother on one side and his sister on the other, two women who had perfected the art of interrogation. Dinner began innocently enough. Turkey carved, wine poured, carols humming softly in the background. Greg allowed himself a moment of hope. Then his mother struck. "So Barbara," she said sweetly, passing the mashed potatoes, "how long have you and Greg been friends?" Barbara smiled, calm as ever. "A little over 2 years. We work together." His sister leaned in, eyes sharp. "Work together? That's nice. And now you're spending Christmas together." Greg felt the heat crawl up his neck. "It's not," Barbara cut in smoothly, her tone light but firm. "Greg invited me because my parents are away for the holidays. It was very kind of him." His grandmother beamed. "Kind and handsome. You're a lucky girl." Barbara laughed, and Greg nearly choked on his wine. She wasn't flustered, wasn't even rattled. She handled the barrage with grace, deflecting questions with humor, turning awkward moments into jokes that had the whole table laughing. When Aunt Marjorie asked if Barbara liked cats, because apparently that was relevant, Barbara grinned and said, "Only if Greg promises to share." Greg stared at her, stunned. She was saving him, not just from the questions, but from the weight of expectation that had hung over him for years. And she was doing it effortlessly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. As dessert arrived, a towering trifle that looked like a structural hazard, Greg caught Barbara's eye across the table. She winked, and something in his chest shifted, warm and certain. He liked having her here, more than he'd expected, more than he'd planned. And for the first time, Greg wondered if this Christmas might change everything. Chapter 9. The big reveal. The Olsen family didn't do anything halfway. Not decorations, not dinner, and definitely not the murder mystery game. After the chaos of missing clues and dramatic accusations, the finale was set to unfold in the grand ballroom, where the chandeliers glittered like frozen fireworks and the fire roared in the marble hearth. Greg stood near the back, nursing a glass of cider and trying to look inconspicuous. He'd spent most of the game trailing Barbara, who had transformed Countess Ravenwood into a force of nature, flirtatious, cunning, and utterly fearless. Watching her work, the room had been equal parts hilarious and something else, something that made his chest tighten every time she laughed. Now, as Grandma Olsen called for silence with a flourish of her sequin shawl, Barbara stepped forward, her eyes bright with mischief. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced in a voice that carried like velvet over glass, "the killer is among us." Greg's cousins leaned in, whispering bets. Aunt Marjorie fanned herself dramatically. Even Grandpa Olsen looked intrigued, his bushy brows raised as Barbara circled the room like a predator in heels. She stopped in front of Todd, who had spent the last hour sulking about his stolen clue. "Inspector Green," she said, her tone dripping with mock scandal. "You've been very busy tonight, haven't you?" Todd sputtered. "Me? Barbara held up a folded card with a flourish. "Your missing clue? Found it tucked behind the conservatory drapes. And do you know what it says?" She opened it slowly, milking the moment. "The killer is the one who hides the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Greg bit back a laugh. Barbara was enjoying this way too much. Todd groaned. "Fine. It was me. I just wanted to win." The room erupted in laughter, applause echoing off the high ceilings. Barbara bowed deeply, her grin dazzling. "Justice is served." Greg clapped along, but his gaze lingered on her, on the way her eyes sparkled, the way her laughter lit up the room like a string of lights. She wasn't just playing a part. She was alive in a way he hadn't seen before, and it hit him like a quiet revelation. He didn't want this to end. As the family dispersed toward dessert, Grandma Olsen swept past Greg, her perfume a cloud of cinnamon and roses. She leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "She's perfect, Gregory. Don't be an idiot." Greg blinked. "Grandma." But she was gone, leaving him with nothing but the echo of her words and the sudden, undeniable truth humming in his chest. Barbara wasn't just saving him from awkward questions. She was changing everything. Chapter 10. Snowstorm and Stolen Time. The snow started as a whisper against the windows, soft, harmless, almost pretty. By mid-afternoon, it was a full-blown blizzard, the kind that swallowed the world in white and made escape impossible. Greg stood at the frosted glass of the library, watching flakes whirl like dancers in a frantic waltz. "Looks like we're stuck," Barbara said behind him, her voice warm and amused. She was curled on the sofa, legs tucked beneath her, a mug of cocoa cradled in her hands. Her sweater was oversized, sleeves grazing her knuckles, and Greg had to look away before his brain short-circuited. "Yeah," he said, trying for casual. "Roads are closed. Grandpa says it might be tomorrow before the plows get through." Barbara grinned. "So, bonus day at the Olsen estate? Lucky you," Greg deadpanned, but his lips twitched. The house had settled into a cozy hush. The family, defeated by the storm, scattered into corners with board games and blankets. Carols drifted faintly from the parlor, mingling with the crackle of the fire. Felt like time had slowed, like the world outside didn't exist. Barbara patted the cushion beside her. "Come on, Professor Plumridge. Sit. You've been pacing like you're plotting a heist." Greg hesitated, then crossed the room and sank onto the sofa, careful to keep a respectable distance. Barbara handed him a second mug of cocoa, steam curling like a question mark. "Thanks," he said, fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. Too brief, too light, but enough to send a spark racing up his arm. They sipped in silence for a moment, watching the snow blur the world beyond the glass. Then Barbara spoke, her voice softer now. "You know, this is nice." Greg glanced at her. "Being snowed in? Being here," she said simply. "With you." The words landed like a stone in a still pond, rippling through him in ways he didn't expect. He searched her face, looking for the joke, the tease, but there was none. Just Barbara, calm and honest, her eyes steady on his. Greg swallowed. "I'm glad you came," he said, and it felt like the truest thing he'd said all week. Barbara smiled, and the room seemed to tilt, the firelight painting her in gold. For a heartbeat, Greg thought about closing the distance, about leaning in, about what it would feel like to kiss her while the storm raged outside. Then the door burst open, and his grandmother swept in with a tray of cookies and a declaration that snow days are for family charades. The moment shattered like glass, leaving Greg with nothing but the echo of Barbara's smile and the quiet thrum of possibility. Chapter 11. The kiss under the mistletoe. The storm had turned the world outside into a frozen wonderland, but inside the Olsen estate, the warmth was almost dizzying, firelight flickering, laughter spilling from every room, and the scent of cinnamon and pine curling through the air like a promise. Greg wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Barbara. They'd spent the afternoon tangled in family charades, laughing until their sides hurt, and now the house had settled into a cozy lull. Most of the family had drifted off to watch old movies or nap in armchairs. Greg wandered into the hallway, searching for quiet, and found Barbara standing beneath the archway near the conservatory. She was looking up. Greg followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. There, hanging from the garland-wrapped arch, was a sprig of mistletoe, green leaves and white berries, dangling like fate itself. Barbara turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. The air between them hummed, charged and fragile, like the pause before a song begins. "Well," Barbara said softly, her lips curving into a smile that was equal parts amused and daring. "Looks like tradition is calling." Greg's pulse spiked. He opened his mouth, probably to say something awkward and deeply unromantic, but the words never came. Instead, he stepped closer, his breath catching as the space between them shrank to nothing. "Barbara," he murmured, and her name felt like a secret on his tongue. She tilted her head, eyes bright, and for once, Greg didn't overthink. He didn't calculate risk or run mental simulations. He just leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, like testing the water, but then Barbara's hand slid lightly against his chest, and Greg felt the world tilt. Warmth flooded through him, drowning out the storm, the house, everything but her. It was perfect, until the applause started. Greg jerked back to find his grandmother standing 10 feet away, clapping like she'd just witnessed the finale of a Broadway show. Behind her, two cousins peeked around the corner, grinning like conspirators. "Finally," Grandma Olsen declared, eyes sparkling. "Took you long enough," Greg groaned, burying his face in his hands. Barbara laughed, a bright, unrestrained sound that made Greg want to kiss her all over again, audience or not. And maybe, he thought, as his grandmother launched into a speech about destiny and mistletoe, he would. Chapter 12. Departure and Decision. The storm broke overnight, leaving the world glittering under a pale winter sun. Icicles dripped from the eaves like crystal daggers, and the driveway gleamed with fresh snow, plowed into neat banks by Greg's uncle at dawn. The Olsen estate buzzed with the bittersweet hum of departure. Suitcases thumping downstairs, voices calling goodbyes, the scent of coffee and pine lingering like a memory. Greg stood in the guest room, folding his sweater with mechanical precision. Across the room, Barbara zipped her bag, her movements calm, unhurried. But Greg felt anything but calm. The kiss under the mistletoe had rewired something in him, something he couldn't ignore now, no matter how hard he tried. He replayed it in his head like a loop, the warmth of her lips, the way her laughter had spilled out when his grandmother applauded, the look in her eyes that wasn't teasing or amused but something deeper, something that made his chest ache. And now she was leaving. Barbara glanced up, catching his gaze. "You okay?" Greg swallowed. "Yeah, just thinking about how your family's going to miss me," she teased, but her smile was softer this time, almost shy. "They will," Greg said honestly. "Grandma's already planning next Christmas." Barbara laughed, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "She's a force of nature." They walked downstairs together, the house glowing with morning light. His family swarmed them with hugs and promises to see you soon, Grandma Olsen whispering something about wedding bells that made Greg choke on his goodbye. Barbara handled it all with grace, smiling, thanking everyone, leaving a trail of warmth in her wake. Outside, the air was sharp and clean, the snow crunching under their boots as they crossed to Greg's car. He loaded the bags in silence, his thoughts a tangled mess of words he couldn't seem to say. Barbara slid into the passenger seat, her breath fogging the glass. "Thanks for letting me crash your family Christmas," she said lightly. "It was, honestly, one of the best holidays I've had in years." Greg gripped the steering wheel, his pulse thudding like a drum. "I'm glad you came," he said, and the words felt too small, too thin for what he meant. Barbara looked at him then, really looked, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to the space between them. "Greg," she said softly, "call me." It wasn't a question. It wasn't casual. It was a promise, tucked into 3 simple words. Greg nodded, his throat tight. "I will." And as they drove away from the estate, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror, Greg realized something with startling clarity. His gloriously terrible plan had led him somewhere he hadn't expected, somewhere he didn't want to leave behind. Chapter 13. New Year, New Beginning. New Year's Eve crept in quietly, like a secret waiting to be told. Greg stood outside Barbara's apartment building, snow crunching under his boots, his breath fogging in the icy air. He clutched the small box in his pocket. Not a ring, not yet, but something that felt like a promise. His heart thudded like a drumline, loud enough to drown out the distant fireworks popping over the city. He'd spent the week replaying everything, the laughter, the late-night talks, the kiss under the mistletoe. Every memory had sharpened into one undeniable truth. He didn't want this to end. Not after Christmas, not after the storm, not ever. Greg climbed the steps and knocked, his pulse ticking faster with each second. The door opened, and there she was, Barbara, in a soft gray sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders, her smile lighting up the dim hallway like the first spark of midnight. "Greg," she said, surprised but warm. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed, words tangling in his throat. "I didn't want to wait." Barbara tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Wait for what?" Greg reached into his pocket and pulled out the box. A simple silver charm shaped like a snowflake, delicate and bright. "To tell you that Christmas wasn't just a plan. It was the best week of my life, and I want more of that. More of you." For a heartbeat, silence stretched between them, fragile and shimmering like ice. Then Barbara smiled. A slow, radiant smile that made Greg feel like the world had just tilted into place. "Come in," she said softly, stepping aside. "Before you freeze." Greg laughed, relief flooding through him as he crossed the threshold. The apartment was warm, cozy, filled with the faint scent of vanilla and the glow of string lights. Barbara closed the door, turned to him, and before he could say another word, she kissed him. It wasn't hesitant this time. It was sure, certain, like an answer to a question he hadn't dared to ask out loud. Greg kissed her back, his hands trembling slightly as they slid to her waist, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. No snow, no fireworks, just the quiet thrum of something new and real. When they finally broke apart, Barbara rested her forehead against his, her breath warm against his skin. "You know," she whispered, "that was a gloriously terrible plan." Greg grinned, his chest aching with something that felt suspiciously like joy. "Best mistake I ever made." Outside, the city erupted in cheers as midnight struck, but Greg barely heard it. He was too busy memorizing the curve of Barbara's smile, the sound of her laughter, the feel of her hand in his. New year, new beginning. And for the first time in a long time, Greg Olsen felt like he was exactly where he belonged.